Hi, I'm Ant. Back in the day, I used to go around as Millwall Ant, and here's a story I've not told in years, and it just exists in the world and comes back to haunt me occasionally. But it's the tale of how Dominic Masters from the others helped keep me out of prison. Before I start, though, I want to stress that whilst this is a story I can tell with a degree of confidence, it's not a story I'm particularly proud of. I was a bit of a twat back in the day, and this story is the peak of that twatty existence. In 2004 or so, I was travelling the country following bands like the Libertines around and doing a lot of drugs. And it was a lot of drugs. And to fund this lifestyle, I started dipping into the till at work. I was working at Starbucks, I was a manager, and I had access to quite a bit of money. One day I heard that Pete Doherty was doing a last minute gig somewhere in East London. I was just finishing my shift, didn't have the cash to get there, and thought, well, I'll nick 50 quid from the till and figure out how to replace it a week later. I could always claim it had dropped down the back of the safe or something like that. Anyway, I went to the gig, had a great night. Pete obviously didn't show up because it was 2004 and that's what happened on the internet a lot. We just used to gather and it was a lot of fun. A week later, no one at work had noticed the 50 quid missing, so I did it again and again and again. And eventually I was dipping my hand into the till and pulling out wads of cash with seemingly no consequence. Now, I'll be real for a moment. I knew there would obviously be consequences. I knew at some point the shit would hit the fan. What I probably didn't know at that point was that I had a fuck ton of undiagnosed mental health conditions, and I wasn't thinking clearly, let's put it like that. I've had pretty severe obsessive compulsive disorder my whole life, and at the moment I can't leave my house at all. I have so many coping mechanisms that I use to fight the OCD, like hand washing, checking locks, counting rituals, etc. What I found back then was that cocaine made those coping tools completely obsolete. So I didn't really care much about the risks I was taking. I was very depressed, but I'd found something that gave me a bit of a reason for living and a drug that allowed me to actually do it. I'd been a teenager during Britpop, and I was usually too scared to leave my bedroom to ever get to go to gigs. So for me, this was a real second chance to live within a music scene. Anyway, this routine of nicking cash and going on week-long benders with bands carried on for a while. One day I turn up for work and see 3 police officers and someone from head office. The police later asked me why I didn't just run, and it's like, why would I? I knew I was obviously guilty. I just sat, drank a cup of tea while I waited for them to do whatever they were doing, and then asked me to join them. I was arrested, charged with theft. By the time the police were called, I'd stolen about 14 grand. Now, I knew I'd taken a lot, but I had no idea it was that much. Anyway, let me get this back on point. A few days after my arrest, Dom had put out a call for people to help with the video for their next single, William. I turned up somewhere in London, dressed up as a panda, had a great day, and was just about to leave when Dominic pulled me to one side and asked me to come out the back of the pub with him. He'd heard about what was going on and wanted to help. They still had bits of the video to film, and he kept getting shouted at to come back in, and he'd flash a hand up to ask him to wait. He was currently phoning Alan McGee to see if he'd help. He also phoned Pete Doherty's manager based on the logic that he was keeping Pete out of prison a lot. But of course the reality to that is he was very busy keeping Pete out of prison a lot, so didn't really have time to work on my case. The video shoot continued with occasional breaks for more thinking through the options, and the day ended with Dom hooking me up with guest lists for their show at the NME Awards the following day, where we'd talk about it more. The next day I went along, saw them perform, got introduced to the band's manager Matt. We chatted about what I'd done. I got asked if I actually did it, and I was always really quick to say, oh yeah, I'm completely guilty. That was the base we're starting from. We put a plan together. I'd get clean. Matt would write to the court saying I was working for the band and therefore gainfully employed. And he helped me get some other letters of support that stressed how out of character it was for me, things like that. And so I became an unpaid employee of a band I absolutely love, the Others. What that meant most of the time is that I'd hang around, help with the guest list occasionally, sell some merch, and sadly continue with my drug habit every day. I repeat my earlier statement, I was a twat. Every gig that we went to, people would chant Free Millwall. And I remember going to the Paradiso Club in Amsterdam where the Others played, supporting the Kaiser Chiefs. The Cribs were out there. It was a real little, wonderful little tour. We all went out there for the day. And there were thousands of people in this crowd, and Dutch people started singing it. And it was just so bizarre. And of course, like the slight idiot that I was at the time, I was living this strange sort of dual life where I'd be some kind of anti-hero at gigs, living the life of a rock star with absolutely zero musical ability, then coming home and just crying and being unable to get out of bed for 3 days. My girlfriend at the time saw like both sides to this, and I treated her abysmally. She had to witness me showing off to a bunch of kids at gigs, and then was there for me at my lowest, which was the entire rest of the time. But there were some amazing high points. You know, it was a lot of fun going to gigs, being recognised, being part of that inner circle. The 853 was a wonderful thing. It got a lot of stick from a lot of people, but it really was very cool. The original people that formed it on the top of a bus, like, slightly distanced themselves over time because more and more people got involved. And I was always very lucky that those original 853 members always treated me very nicely. They were all very cool, cooler than I was, you know, and it was a really good group of people to hang around with. And then as more people came in, you then became the old guard and helped. We'd all obviously crowd surf during the others' gigs, and then it became a sort of duty by the time This Is For The Poor, the last song, came on, that some of us would crowd surf first, then protect the drum kit from getting absolutely battered by everyone else making their way on for the stage invasion. Honestly, it's taken a hell of a long time for me to get past my own behaviour and how I was and how depressed I was and everything like that, to be able to truly enjoy some of those amazing moments that were touring with that band. Eventually my court date came around, and in massive part due to the work done by the band, I got away with a fine, just paying the money back that I'd stolen, and a community service order. I walked out the court and my lawyer said he'd never seen anyone steal that amount of money and not get a custodial sentence. I stepped out the courtroom, my phone lit up with texts from members of the 853, most of whom I'd never met, wishing me luck, congratulating me, that sort of thing. I was on the first train up to London to see Dominic. I got high. I demonstrated no personal growth at all. In later weeks, I did interviews with the NME. There was a headline on the NME, which band loved their fans so much they bailed one out of jail. That was good fun. My little bit of notoriety and low-level indie fame continued just a little bit longer. I remember doing an interview with Spin magazine, and I'll never forget telling this American journalist the story with Dominic backstage and explaining how he's clean now and everything was rosy. The interview finishing and me just offering the guy a line. It really did take me a further 3 months of acting like an idiot before I was finally ready to sort of leave it all behind. I left that whole scene, moved back in with my dad, cleaned up, got a job, turned my life around. I mean, I'm now very depressed all the time and I now can't leave my house ever. The perils of not ever finding a drug that worked quite like Coke did for treating my OCD, despite years of therapy and psychiatric appointments. But I have all these amazing memories and I have that amazing story to tell. And whilst I'm definitely ashamed of elements of it, it was an amazing thing to be a part of. And yeah, very lucky to be involved with it. And the others, the Paddingtons, the Cribs, bands like that all remain on my playlist constantly for, like, I just love that music. I love that scene and it was magical. And that's it. And it's just Ant now. It's not Millwall Ant. So I shall sign off and thanks very much.